let's get started. I want to welcome everyone. I'm Scott Roselle from I'm the Helen Farnsworth Senior Fellow at Freeman Spogli Institute and a co-director of SCCei, right? The Stanford Center on China's Economy and Institutions. Okay, let me tell you now a little about today's speaker. He's Associate Professor for Environmental Economics at Duke Kunshan University. So that's on the other side of the province over there. Since 2016, he's founded the Environmental Research Center and the International Masters of Environmental Policy at Duke Kunshan. During 21-22, he served as the Volkswagen Visiting Chair of Sustainability, our Schwarzman College. We have a whole bunch of Stanford people at Schwarzman College, and a couple of our professors teach there, at Tsinghua. Professor Zhang is co-chair of the Environmental Economics Committee of the Chinese Academy of Environmental Sciences, an advisory board for the Nicholas Institute, Environmental Policy Association, and a board member of the Professional Association of Chinese Environment. He is totally integrated into many different parts of China's environmental systems and organizations. So I'm going to leave it at that. Junjie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Scott, for the warm introduction. It's a really pleasure to present our new research in the new Chinese New Year. We have been working on this project in the last couple of days and making the student working with me feeling that I'm an oppressive co-author. But this is really something that's very exciting. We have started working since last summer, but it's still much a piece of work in progress. So in this project, we have been working on the impact, evaluating the impact of pollution levy on Chinese firms using the firm level data. The project is in collaboration with Professor Zhang Ning from Shandong University in Weihai and PhD student Zhou Tao from Shandong University. So again, this is a very much work in progress, and I would appreciate the comments and the suggestions from the audience. I suppose that you can interrupt me anywhere in the presentation. So in this project, we are working on the pollution levy. When we started this project, actually, I have a couple of things to present. I decided to present this topic because the pollution levy has been tried in China for a very long time, but not many research has evaluated what's its impacts on firm, especially on firm competitiveness. So we try to attack this problem from the newly available data. So why we're interested in this topic? So we are interested in environmental tax has been tried in China since China's opening its door in late 1970s. So it's a very long history. So the environmental tax, in theory, is a cost-effective means to correct externalities. This is a very well known, and this is also a new source of tax revenue. In history, China has been relying on environmental fee, emission fee, or pollution levy, many names, but very similar. Use that to fund the operation of local government. So use this as a source of tax revenue for these two purposes. It's a long debate, how shall we set the environmental tax? And for decades in China, many argue that the environmental tax rate is way too low. Of course, there are the many debates in the economics literature, including Larry. I saw Larry in the audience, the major contributor to this topic. So the deviation from the theoretically perfect Pigouvian tax rate. So in theory, we should set the optimal tax rate at the same rate of marginal damage per unit of emissions, but actually in the real world, because of the pre-existing market distortions, then it's not necessary being equal for the optimal tax rate and the marginal damage. This is the theory, but in the real world, when the decision makers, when they set environmental tax rate, the major concern is industrial competitiveness. Whether or not, because China is heavily reliant on manufacturing, on industries, on export. So what's the impact of pollution tax on the industrial competitiveness? This is actually at the center of the debate. And this constraint has become increasingly binding in recent years. I will discuss in 2 slides later. The third reason why environmental tax is set in many times lower than the marginal damage, because environmental tax, like in many other countries, is used as a complementary approach in a regulatory environment dominated by prescriptive measures. So in this empirical setting, we will discuss sulfur dioxide pollution levy. There are a plethora of regulatory tools, mainly command and control approaches. These approaches used to regulate sulfur dioxide emissions. Market-based instruments like environmental tax or pollution levy, because this is not literally a tax, is only a complementary approach. In this case, it can only regulate residual pollutions that left over by prescriptive approach. So in this case, environmental tax does not reflect the marginal social cost of abatement in this case, because the shadow value of abatement is much higher than the environmental tax implies. So therefore, given in the real world, the environmental tax is set at a low level and used as a complementary approach. So we are wondering, it's an empirical question whether an environmental tax like this at a low level and as a complementary approach can achieve its intended goal of incentivizing emission reductions and also improve social well-being. This is an empirical question we want to. So in this paper, we try to answer how effective is China's environmental tax and how does that change the firm behavior. There's another debate. It's about the regulatory stringency on firm competitiveness. Environmental regulations change relative cost of production, increases energy price and the process and management cost significantly, especially since 2013. Since the Chinese leader advocates, the green mountains, the lush waters are also gold mountains. China has stepped up its environmental regulation dramatically. I can see very visible change in China's environmental quality, but at the same time, it creates concerns how these environmental regulations, tightening environmental regulations, what is the impact on China's productivity change, on China's economic competitiveness? This is exactly the same concern like the United States since 1970s. So the environmental regulations change the relative cost of production. It will have multiple outcomes. It will have environmental outcomes. How that changed, that's pretty much visible. We really don't need economists to tell Chinese people that China's environment is getting better. Just use your eyes, use your nose. You can tell that. I mean, I moved back to China from San Diego in 2016. Back then, the air pollution was really bad, but now it's pretty much, I can still discern air pollution, but it has been much better. So China has cleaned up much faster than any other country in the world. We compared the Beijing and London. Beijing is much faster. So of course,
Junjie, are you going to look at this across China or just like in Beijing? So if you probably moved to Beijing. I saw you're a Schwarzman fellow, right? And you're in Beijing. Have you been to Zhengzhou or Xi'an or, I mean, those, basically what they did is they moved all the power plants out there, and those places have got really bad. and Beijing had got really good. I mean, I know you aren't studying this, but is that going to happen with with these environmental taxes too? Are they going to be, really high in Beijing, so Beijing gets better, but then we're going to lower them, or the Xi'an government says we don't want it to affect our output, so we're not going to collect them, or we're going to make them really cheap or something like that. So is this going to be, I mean, so I always tell people Beijing has got better, but China, I think, has got worse over the last 5 or 6 years. And but I don't want you to answer that again. I want you to say, are these environmental laws, or these taxes that you're going to be studying, are they province by province, city by city, or are they national?
These are so of course I will introduce the policy later. This is it's the experiments of a subset of the provinces implemented the policy. So we'll look at all firms in China. But so really depends on the indicators that you look at. Overall, based on the satellite data, the China's overall environment has been improving. So, but of course, for some indicators, that's debatable. I see.
Larry, do you have a question?
Larry, you're muted.
Unmute, Larry.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, hello, and nice to see you. I should have asked this question 2 slides ago, but you made the important point that things are different when you introduce an environmental tax in a world where there's all these other pre-existing regulations. But about your question about, can an environmental tax then still improve welfare? Suppose that you're defining welfare here in pure efficiency terms, that is aggregate net benefits. It seems to me, as long as the pre-existing regulations, the problem with them is they may not eke out all the lowest cost options. And as long as there's some options out there for which the marginal abatement costs are quite low, then an environmental tax is going to soak up those additional opportunities, and it would have to be beneficial in terms of efficiency, unless you're thinking about some kinds of interactions which would change that. So I'm wondering it just seems to me it's less of a question whether there's still room for an environmental tax, even in a world where you've got all these other, more conventional regulations in place.
Yeah. Larry's question is very important. So it really depends on those command and control policy, if they have already taken care of those low cost abatement opportunities. If they yes, and if the environmental tax is dramatically lower than the marginal cost of abatement, then the tax does not work at all. It's just it's a payment to the government, right? So I think this is something that we want to test here. If there's it's indeed a huge number of policies existing. So because we believe that Chinese government, they are very smart. Are they smart enough that they design the policy, the command and control policies to consider all these low cost options? So this is something we want to test. Yeah. This is very important. So in terms of the empirical evidence on firm productivity, the regular stringency, and the firm competitivity, I think this is at the core of environmental on the consideration of environmental regulation nowadays. The empirical evidence on this topic has been ambiguous. So the literature has found, using the US data, the larger than 1.2 million of the firm records, find that there's a negative impact on TFP. They're also in the literature, there's the positive impact of environmental regulation on firm productivity, including our very recent research that's published on PNAS. We found that China's regional pilots increases the Chinese firms' total factor productivity. We have very strong evidence for that. When the firms, they reduce their carbon emissions, they also improve their management and also the process, reduce the input costs. at the same, while they maintain the same level of output, it means that they improve their total factor productivity. So this is our most recent evidence from China's carbon market, of course, on the regional carbon market pilots. And also there are large, I only picked a few of the studies that found that there's no effect in the about the effect of regular stringency or firm competitiveness. So there's one challenge. There's things the study on regular stringency and firm competitiveness have been started in China for about more than 20 years. But that's the biggest challenge is that how can we measure regulatory stringency? Many studies in the past use the outcome as the measurement of stringency. For example, using the paid, the environmental tax per firm as an indicator of environmental stringency. So environmental stringency includes how to set the tax rate, the fee rate, and the enforcement. And the enforcement in China is could be endogenous, because in many cases, the environmental tax paid by firm can be negotiated between firms and governments. So it creates the huge challenge to identify the effect of environmental stringency on firm competitiveness. So in empirical research, the challenge is that in order to construct a valid comparison group, we need a policy to be implemented in a subset of regions as good as random. In China, there's a tradition of implementing policy using an experimental style. So it's said by Deng Xiaoping, his famous saying, cross the river by fumbling the stones. So you need to touch the stone to cross the river. So it means that for major policies in China, these policies are always piloted in a subset of regions. If they are doing fine, they will be scaled up to the whole country. Otherwise, well, you will find new policies. So for example, one example is that for the carbon market, the Chinese carbon market was piloted since 2013 in 7 jurisdictions. Then in the last year, China decided to scale up to the nationwide. This is a success, but there's also failures. The failure is about the sulfur dioxide cap and trade program. China started to pilot sulfur dioxide cap and trade program in early 1990s. So it's very early 1990s. It was piloted in many regions for sulfur dioxide cap and trade. It was not very successful. So China never scaled up the policy to the nationwide. For environmental tax, survived much better. So China has been piloting environmental tax for a very long time, and it was piloted in some regions and decided to scale up to the whole country. Now China has a law of environmental tax. This is very rare among the major countries have a environmental tax code. So in this case, we will take advantage of China's pilot style of implementing a policy, try to identify the impact of regulatory stringency on firm competitiveness. So before we start, why we are concerned about the firm competitiveness? Liu He, the famous the vice premier, who is the architect of China's economic policy nowadays, he published a long article in People's Daily late last year. It's a very interesting article. It sounds quite academic article, but Liu He used to be in academics. So what he said about the challenge for China, he said that China's production function is changing. The factor market conditions, combination methods, and the allocation efficiency have changed. China is facing increasingly binding constraints of the environment and natural resources. Carbon peaking and neutrality should be incorporated into China's medium and long-term development framework. High quality development and technological innovation are essential to finding optimal solutions under multiple constraints. So this is an article published in People's Daily. It's the official the newspaper for the Communist Party, but it sounds like an academic article published. This is because of the huge debate now in China. Is China's tightening environmental regulation killing Chinese industry? This is the huge concern, because one of the signature the achievement for President Xi Jinping is environmental achievement. China cleans up after decades of rapid growth without considering for environment, and China continues to pledge tougher environmental regulations. In this case, China is facing huge difficulty in economic growth. So environmental regulations, these tightening environmental regulations, they are killing the Chinese industry. They are supposed to be the Chinese muscle. And this is the huge debate. So Liu He published this article. This also motivated our study to assess the stringency of environmental regulation. What's its impact on Chinese firms? So in this case, we focus on China's environmental taxation. This is about the 40 years of experience when China started to make its environmental legal framework in late 1970s. Well, China used to think that environmental pollution is a problem of capitalism. But when China opened its door, found that environmental pollution is also associated with socialism. So in 1979, China started to pilot on pollution fees, and the fast forward to 2018, China promulgated the environmental protection tax law. As we can tell that this policy, China's environmental taxation, either originally is called a pollution levy, then not until 2018 is called a pollution tax, an environmental protection tax. So in this long 3 decades, China have been revising the rules on pollution fees quite frequently. So what we will focus? We will focus on the reform in 2007, when the State Council promulgated the comprehensive work plan for energy saving and emission reduction. In this reform, China for the first time realized that in the past, China's environmental, the tax or the pollution levy was too low. It could not incentivize, significantly incentivize firms to reduce their emissions. So since 2007, the Chinese government started to test what's the impact of increasing pollution levy rates. So what we focus is between 2003 in this area, when the discharge fee or pollution levy, the system was formally established, and before 2014, this is another reform when the pilots, the results from the pilots extended to the whole country. So what we study is in pretty much in this period, the only policy change on the pollution levy is the regional pilots of increasing pollution levy in this period. What we focus is on the China's reform of sulfur dioxide levy standard, because acid rain and sulfur dioxide emission problem has become a major concern in China in that period. So at the center of our study is the reform in 2007. China started to increase sulfur dioxide emission fee in 2007. So as I mentioned, it's the State Council's comprehensive work plan for energy conservation and emission reduction. The policy was piloted in 17 provinces. So these 17 provinces, they started to roll out an increase of pollution levy from 2007 to 2014. So there's a dramatic increase in emission fee. Before the reform, the emission fee is the 0.63 yuan per kilogram. It's pretty much based on the exchange rate is the 10 cents in the US dollar. So 10 cents. After there are two systems. In Beijing, it was increased to 10 yuan per kilogram. In all other 16 provinces, it doubles. So the rate doubled. So although China in this policy reform doubled its pollution levy, the pollution levy, the rate is still significantly lower than the Pigovian level because based on the estimation, the marginal damage cost per kilogram of sulfur dioxide is about 33 yuan per kilogram. So although the optimal tax rate may be deviate from the marginal damage, it should not be that different. So it means that the Chinese pollution fee is still significantly lower than that. And compared with the other countries, for example, like Sweden, significantly the higher than the Chinese case. So we might be wondering, this is the question that asked by Larry earlier. So
yeah, Larry has another question, Junjie. Larry?
Okay, yes, Larry.
I had my hand up and then I took it down because you may be getting to it, but I'm just curious as to what you're doing to assure that over the same period, there aren't other regulations that are changing that would be introducing a kind of stringency elsewhere, contaminate the results. In most of these cases, is the only change the pollution tax change? And if not, how are you addressing that?
Yeah, this is the very important for our identification. Let me introduce the policy because this is the pollution tax indeed is a complementary policy. It's not the sole policy change. So we will introduce that later. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the rollout of the sulfur dioxide levy standard reform, there are 6 waves of rolling out the policy. So they're very Chinese style. So we from 2007 to 2014, there are a total of 17 provinces, or the big cities like Beijing, Shanghai. They started to implement the sulfur dioxide levy standard reform. So this is the quasi-natural experiment that we will take advantage. Of course, we need to consider because at the same time, there are many other policies they are implemented. And in particular, we will pay attention to the interaction of the pollution levy with other command and control policies. So we have some very interesting results. These results, frankly, we did not have time because many results are new. We did not have time to fully understand why it is so. But I would welcome the further comments. So in this paper, we will examine the effects of increasing emission fee rate on firm emissions and other economic outcomes. So we are asking 2 questions. Is that the extent to which a pollution charge can reduce emissions? This is the first debate. The second is the potential channels through which increasing tax rate reduces emissions. So what's the behavioral responses of firms? The empirical strategy, we take advantage of the rollout of pollution fee increase in 17 provinces since 2007 as a quasi-experiment, and we use the firm level. Unfortunately, we only have firm level emission data and economic characteristics, but this has already been the best data in China. Ideally, we should have a plant level data, but we only have firm level, but we consider this issue about the multi-plant firm later. So the main results, the first, we do find, this is the correctly conjectured by Larry that the levy reform significantly reduces from SO2 emissions by 7.8%. So indeed, there are still low-cost abatement opportunities left over by command and control policies. The second, we also find that pollution levy plays a complementary role in SO2 regulation instead of the central role. So when we try to look at the interaction between the pollution levy and other policies.
Can you tell, Junjie, can you tell me, is 7.8%, is that good or is that near zero?
Well, I think that's pretty good, but the it's pretty flat. I would say it's almost doubles the. Let me say it's pretty much more than doubles the tax rate. But the response is 7.8%. So it means that it's a little bit flat part of the marginal abatement cost curve. So there are other reasons why it's so flat. Yeah.
Also, what is the second bullet under main results saying beyond what the first bullet says? What do you mean by a complementary role here?
Yeah, let me explain that later. We did not think of a better sentence to just describe our results, to summarize our results. Yeah, it's a little bit confusing. Yeah.
Excuse me, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Hi, Professor Zhang, great to see you. So my question is related with Scott's comments earlier. And I was wondering, would you be worried about like spillover effects, like between different waves of the experiment? And also within, as you mentioned, within firms, there could be conglomerates. So maybe firms can adjust by putting more in other places within a firm.
Yeah, spillover, leakage, they are important at this for the regional pilots. Indeed, we will try to consider this issue in our robustness tests. Yeah. Okay, so please allow me to proceed. So we consider that there are several contributions. So the first, understand the responsiveness of large sectors of economy to environmental tax. This is the empirical paper. The second, we try to evaluate the effectiveness of regulatory instruments in reducing firm emissions, similar to prescriptive instruments and incentive-based instruments, etc. And the last, this is also in the literature of impacts of pollution charges on firm emissions and economic outcomes in China. Not many papers. It's interesting. This is the environmental tax is big in China, but not many papers in China in this area. So I think there's a gap in literature, especially in the nationwide assessment of the effective of pollution levy. So in this paper, let me provide some background of the discussion. So in this paper, we focus on sulfur dioxide emissions. This is used to be the most prominent pollutant in China because of the serious acid rain issue. The acid rain in China mainly caused by sulfur dioxide. So in this period, we consider from 1990. This is the period of rapid economic growth. China's industrial value added the increase 20-fold. This is the huge achievement. In the same period, China also cleaned up its environment by its emission of sulfur dioxide peaked around 2007. So the time period that we started is around 2003 and 2014. This is a period that China peaked its sulfur dioxide emissions. In this period, the pollution levy is not the only policy in that period. There are many other policies that can explain that China's dramatically decreases sulfur dioxide emissions. So what are these policies? China has an army of policy in the policy toolbox on controlling acid rain and sulfur dioxide emissions. The most significant one is the regional approach in using the region differentiated the regulations. It's called the two control zone policies since 1998. Two control zones means acid rain control zone and the sulfur dioxide emission control zone. So these two, for the firms in the two control zones, they are subject to tighter environmental regulation and enforcement. So this is there has been the very good research on this topic, evaluating the impact of two control zones on firms. The second, the planning is the very especially for 5-year plans, play a very important role in shaping China's environmental policy. Interestingly, in the 10th 5-year plan, this is from 2000 to 2005, 10th 5-year plan period, China failed to meet its sulfur dioxide target in the 10th FYP. It was rare because China used to achieve the major targets in the 5-year plans. But this is in environment. This is the likely the most significant event. China failed to meet the sulfur dioxide target in the 10th 5-year plan. China did not expect, because of China's access to WTO, its economic growth accelerated. China did not expect that and failed the target. So sulfur dioxide rose actually by 28% in that period. So China decided to heighten its regulations on sulfur dioxide. So in the 11th 5-year plan, 2006 to 2010, incorporate the emission targets of sulfur into the criteria used to evaluate provincial officials. It means the government officials. So for the government officials, I have been working with the Chinese government since 2018. I helped them to draft different kinds of planning documents. For example, for carbon peaking, carbon neutrality. So they care. Why they care for some issues like the environmental issues? Because it's in their the provincial official, local official assessment criteria. So they have a large number of criteria. It's much tougher than the teaching evaluation. They have last time I taught, they have more than 200 of variables used to evaluate. So when the sulfur dioxide emission target entered their assessment, so this is a big deal. The third is nationwide sulfur dioxide regulation during the 11th 5-year plan, like technology mandates, continuous emissions, sorry, that's a typo, continuous emissions, the monitoring system, subsidies, etc. Let me detail some policies they potentially interact with the pollution levy. So based on the Chinese policies, the documents, we compile a large number of documents. These policies, they can interact with the pollution levy. The first one is to lower sulfur content. So the lowering sulfur content proves to be a very effective approach. The US experience in controlling sulfur dioxide emissions is switching coal from high sulfur coal to low sulfur coal. So China, this is mandated to lower sulfur content, phase out high sulfur coal mines, use coal wash, reducing power plant. The second is reducing coal power plant emissions, coal sulfur content, phasing out small generators, improving efficiency, installing scrubbers, etc. The third is other technology mandates, boiler desulfuration, switching from coal to natural gas, industrial process abatement, etc. So all these policies, they are either, they are nationwide. The second, for the two control zones, they will have special policies. So it's clear to us, these policies, if they are nationwide policy, they can be controlled. If they are within the two control zones, so this region-specific policy, so they are specific. So these policies, they will have interact with the pollution levy, but it's unlikely that these policies will be confounded our identification of the impact of pollution levy on the firm outcomes.
I just want to be sure, just for clarification, on the previous slide, Junjie? Oh, yeah. No, previous slide. Can you go back? Are you?
No, I think it's that next. I think it's the next one. The one you just had there.
One more.
Yeah. This
Okay.
one.
Yeah. So I just want to be clear. Are you saying these other policies are already in place and that they've already done a lot of the hard work? So a pollution tax added onto this isn't going to find a lot of low cost opportunities. Or are you saying that going forward in time, these other policies are going to be put into place? I'm not sure which is fixed and which is changing. I just wasn't clear on that.
These policies, they have been in place before the levy increase. So these are pre-existing the prescriptive approaches. Yeah. So they have already. So this policy they reduce the most emissions. This is the most engineering approach. Actually, we have an engineering.
So is this why is this why it went from 150 to 50? Your total emissions, right? And then you only get 7.8% from the 7.8% from the from your tax. Is that why? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I had the same question. So, how big is the tax that's quote unquote only giving you 7.8%? I mean, I think what you're saying, Junjie, is that because of these other policies doing all the hard work, the tax isn't going to find low-cost opportunities to exploit. We're not expecting to get a lot. And what's a lot or little depends on how big a tax you put in place to get that 7.8%.
right.
And how big was it?
So you mean the fee rate of the tax? Yeah. It's 10 cents.
Or what's the elasticity?
Well, it's from 10 cents. I mean, in US dollar, from 10 cents to 20 cents.
Okay.
Per kilogram of the sulfur dioxide. Yeah, it's a small one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we built a small conceptual model. I think I will skip that. It's just that the tax will just regulate. The tax just regulate the residual emissions left over by those prescriptive approach. Better that we see the let's see the diagram. So the discretion, there are two parts emission reduction. So suppose this is the marginal abatement cost curve. There's a portion of the marginal abatement cost curve has already been taken care of by the command and control measures. Like they are for coal-fired power plants, they are required to install scrubbers. So the scrubbers, not necessarily the lowest cost of abatement, not necessarily the highest cost, maybe take a part of the marginal cost of abatement. So for this period, for this portion. So for the residual emissions left over to the pollution levy, it's like this is could be the marginal abatement cost curve like this on the right panel. So the effectiveness, the impact of the tax really depends on the tax level. So if the tax level is increasing from T2 a little bit above T2, there will be no abatement at all because for this portion has already been taken care of by the command and control measures. So this is an empirical question. If the tax is from T1 to T2 or from T2 to T3 or just within the CL to CH, this is something that we don't know. This is something that we want to test in our paper. So in terms of empirical specification, it's very straightforward because this is a rolling out of the fee increase. So we have the data is at the firm level. So we know the firm, the industry, at what provinces, at what region and a year. The region included, for example, if this is a two control zone, they are bigger than province. So there's a cover different provinces. On the left-hand side, we use the environmental outcomes and other economic outcomes on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, the key variable is the change of levy. We have the dummy indicating emission fee increase, and also we use the level, the change of the emission fee level change. So we use both. We control for a large number of provincial characteristics before the policy, and controlling for trends using a flexible approach. And the detailed data, the micro data, enables us to control for a large number of fixed effects at the firm level, region year level, industry year level. So these data enable us to identify the impact of the levy on the different outcomes. So the data that we use, 3 sources. The first, we use the annual survey of industrial firms that covers 90% of China's industrial output values, more than 40 industries and 500 sub-industries. The second is the annual environmental survey of polluting firms. It provides comprehensive information about a firm's energy, water, pollution, treatment facilities, and also the key industrial firms' emissions are more than 85% of total emissions. So for these 2 data sets, they are survey cover a portion, a large number of portion, but the caveat is that it could not cover all firms, especially for small firms. This creates a challenge because for these policies, many of these policies, they try to outdate, phase out those small polluting firms, but they are not reflected in our research because we don't have data. So what we look at actually is at the intensive margin. On the operating firms, those firms, they above scale, they are included in the survey. This is the caveat of the data. So the data we have sulfur dioxide, we have a waste gas, we have other emissions and economic characteristics, etc. So for these data, we will be shown in later research, mainly at the firm level, these attributes. So let's look at the main results. The effects of levy on sulfur dioxide emissions. We have tried numerous specifications I leave later. So if we look at the shaded area, we use a binary indicator for the change of the levy. These are our main results. That for the pollution levy increase reduces the sulfur dioxide emissions by 7.8%. The dependent variables that log sulfur dioxide emissions. So this is our main results. And we also use the levy rate, use the level of levy. We found this is the levy rate. That's a smaller effect. Because the levy rate, the change is pretty much doubles. So the binary variable actually serves better for our purpose. So we will use the specification in column 2 throughout the discussion.
So you know, one thing I'm worried about is you have, and you said it was your own problem, that you have firm, you basically, this is firm level data, and then you have provincial fixed effects. And then these firms all locate in Beijing, Shenzhen, Shanghai, and they've had really strict policies. And so, you know, are you overestimating or underestimating, because you're giving all the credit to those firms, right? Because it seems maybe you're underestimating, maybe, right? Because you're using the Beijing change of the levy, which is higher, right? So what do you have you thought about that?
I have a test for that. So let me introduce that later.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good hunch.
Yeah, Junjie, ask you 2 other questions. First of all, I think this is what Scott asked before. I just want to understand kind of whether we think this is a big change or a small change relative to the tax rate. So the elasticity here we should think of as the percentage change in emissions from relative to the percentage change in the tax rate is what?
The tax rate change is a binary. yes or no, whether or not a firm is subject to increase. So there's a binary, the delta levy.
Well, I
It's the
suppose
double.
we want to answer the question, do you have to use a huge tax to get a significant emissions reduction or a small tax? Is there a way that this sheds light on that?
I would say a large tax increase, much higher. Yeah.
But that, in a way, that's not in this table, but that's, you have information on that.
I don't.
Then one other question about drawing sort of well-being effects from this. If you could possibly go back 2 slides, I think it's 2. One the other direction, maybe more. It's where you had that nice supply diagram with the kink in it to show
Supply
the
diagram.
Oh yeah.
That one.
Yes.
I think that really helps a lot. It's very clear. So then the question is, there basically the tax has to be above CH to get anything. And my question is, how big is CH relative to the marginal environmental damages? For example, do you have to have a tax that's huge so that even though you're getting emissions reductions, it's costing China more to the economy than the environmental benefit? So in some question, it's sort of asking, how high is CH relative to the environmental benefit?
Yeah.
It helps us know whether we should even have any pollution levies.
Larry, we haven't done that yet, but this is indeed for the CH really depends on the industries, because there's a industry and a region differentiated regulation. So they in aggregate we don't know. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's probably an unfair question at this point, but I think it's an interesting one that's worth looking at in the future, because it raises the fundamental question whether at the margin having these pollution levies are giving us a bang for the buck or giving us more than we lose.
Yeah, that's true.
Excuse me, I have a question about the strategy.
Yes.
So I was wondering, you mentioned about the policy and also enforcement. Could it be the case that if you increase the levy, then it's more difficult to enforce such kind of tax? So, for example, firms may simply underreport their emission. So in the end, you would get lower emission fees in total. But also maybe, so that may directly speak to this. What actually how much the reduction leads to environmental benefits and health benefits.
Yeah. Enforcement is actually also at the center of our consideration. We don't, unfortunately, because of the we don't have data for enforcement. So we did one robustness test to see if we include the indicator for enforcement, does that change our story? So let me show that later. Yeah, but indeed, enforcement is a very important story here.
Junjie, I was just told by our communication staff, my boss, that probably, and I saw you have about 11 slides left. Why don't you focus for the next 5 or so minutes and try to get through most of the story, and then we'll open up for general questions. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, it's close. Okay, so the main result is here, right? So in terms of the parallel trend test, it looks perfect. So it means the validity of our study. And also we're considered, because there's a staggered the difference in difference. So we do considered the decomposition of the effect to see what's the source of variation. It seems that this is also not a big problem. So this is the technical. Let me skip this part too. So for the staggered DID, it's not a concern. So we have discussed a couple of issues about the robustness of our results. So the first, there's a relocation of firms. This has been asked by Scott. So we have been just focusing on non-relocating firms. The results are very similar. So it means that relocation is not a big concern. The second, we only restrict to provinces with fee rate increases within the 17 provinces. The results are very similar. In terms of the spillover or leakage, we look at only those single plant firms. The vast majority of records in our data, they are single plant firms. More than 70% are single plant firms. So we restrict to single plant firms to see the leakage or spillover effect, found that the results are very similar. We exclude the cabinet trade in 2007. This is the similar. Olympic Games, this is a regional policy, similar. Control for intensity of enforcement. This is the enforcement that's before the policy. We use the pollution fee per unit of firm as an indicator for enforcement. We found that if we control for intensity of enforcement, our results are similar. We also define the treatment variable differently, very similar. Also, we use a different identification strategy using the match DID. The results are also very similar. So we are quite confident that our main results, that the 7.8% of emission reduction induced by the fee rise is quite robust. So we are interested in the channels of emission reduction. The channels of emission reduction, the first, we find that there's a scale effect. Emission reduction is mainly achieved through the reducing coal consumption and sulfur dioxide generation. Sulfur dioxide generation, that means the total sulfur dioxide generated by this firm. It can be abated or it can be emitted. So the total generation decreases. It could be due to the coal consumption. They are also due to the decrease in output. We will show later. There's also a decrease in output. So it means this is mainly caused by the scale effect. The second, we found no effect on energy efficiency improvement. We found no effect on switching to low sulfur coal because this policy has already been covered. China has a nationwide policy to switch to low sulfur coal. For energy efficiency improvement, there's also the nationwide policy on the energy efficiency and emission intensity. And we found no effect on the end of the pipe solution installing waste gas capacity and equipment, because for the emitting the facilities, they have already been required by other policies to install abatement facility. So it seems that why pollution levy achieves emission reduction mainly through the scale effect by reducing coal consumption and then sulfur dioxide generation. So what's the impact of pre-existing regulations? We test three things here. The first, we test whether we separate samples by dirty industry and the clean industry. We found, interestingly, pollution levy has no effect on the pollution levy change, has no effect on dirty sector, because dirty sectors, they have already been heavily regulated by the command and control policies. So we found it's negative, but this is not precise. We found the effect mainly driven by the clean sectors. They are not subject to the emission. The clean and dirty, they are defined by the whether or not they are sectoral emissions above or below average. The second, we test the effects for power sector and non-power sector. No effect for the power sector, because the power sector accounts for about half of sulfur dioxide emissions. No precise effect. But for non-power sectors, they were not fully covered by command and control approaches. We found significant effect. The third, we consider the separate samples for 2 control zones and non-2 control zones. Remember that for 2 control zones, they are subject to more stringent enforcement. And for non-2 control zones, they have a relatively lax enforcement. We found that 2 control zones, they are significant. This is also another indicator suggestion that this is the enforcement is important for our story. Next one. We also considered the economic consequences of a levy rate increase. I have to admit that for this part, this is the something the results were a little bit hard to interpret. The first, we found that the effect of the fee increase, the pollution levy increase on output, that's negative and significant. On TFP, negative but not precise. On a positive impact on operating revenue, increases operating cost. This is within expectation. Profit increases, operating profit increases, total profit increases. So this is we conjecture that we haven't tested yet. This is because for the increasing of the pollution levy, actually the drive out the business of a lot of small firms. They will have creates a market concentration for the large firms in our survey data. And because of the output price increases, help those firms to improve their operating revenue and also achieve a positive profit. But we need more tests. We are not sure at this moment how to interpret this result. But at least we found that this is very interesting results.
It's interesting and surprising. And you mentioned market power. Is that a critical element of your explanation?
I would say so for example, for recent concept, the tightening environmental regulations making the large, the firms benefit a lot. They are doing much better under tightening environmental regulation because they are concentrating their market shares.
So can you tell me, it's not the power industry, can you tell me real quick which industries got the most impact? For example,
for the clean industries, for those industries, they are not covered by the
right. So what are they, for example?
The manufacturing, for example. So we have the manufacturing. Many manufacturing, they don't emit a lot. But they do emit, they have boilers, for example, they are impacted the most. Not a power sector, but other manufacturing sector. Okay, so we are also interested, since we mentioned the compliance and enforcement, there are three types of firms in China: state-owned, private firms, and the foreign firms. It seems that the foreign firm, this is consistent with the literature, that the foreign firms are very compliant, and the state-owned enterprises, they also follow the rule. But it seems that we found no effect for the private firms, So is this because of the compliance, the story? The private firms, they tend to dodge the environmental regulations. This is also, we need more tests, but this is the heterogeneous responses by firm type. We did a back of the envelope calculation. Please ignore this at this moment. We are still tidy up the calculation, but this is very much a back of the envelope calculation. We estimate the cost of the regulation by increasing pollution levy, and the benefit based on the parameter estimate, the elasticity that we achieved. We found that the benefit is much higher than the cost, but this is we will still need more work on this part.
What is your measure of benefit? Is that environmental benefit or something else?
Yeah. Only environmental benefit.
But
yeah,
wouldn't that involve looking at the marginal, the relationship between the tax, the inclusive of tax price, no, the tax rate and the marginal environmental benefit?
Yeah, so we simulate is from the 0.63 to 1.28. This is for the 16 provinces. It's the fee scheduling change.
And you relate that to estimates of the environmental damage per ton at the margin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I see you're going to finish up. Good. Perfect timing. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So to not to conclude, so a couple of The firms respond to increasing tax rate by further reducing emissions. The estimate a little bit different because only we exclude Beijing in our estimate in this case. So we found that doubling tax rate leading to 6.87% reduction in emissions, not including Beijing. Including Beijing, the rate is a little bit higher because Beijing increased much higher. So it's not a huge change. It's a doubling tax rate, but the level is still low. We found the channels mainly through the scale effect. No evidence of end of the pipe solution because all the prescriptive measures, they regulate the end of the pipe solutions. They have already been taken care of. So we found a couple of things we still need to explain. The elasticity of emission with respect to the tax rate is a bit low in our opinion. So the reason is that it's likely regulating only residual emissions. So not many opportunities left over. The vast majority of emissions have already been covered by prescriptive approaches. The second, long and short term, firms take time to adjust. We did find in our dynamic effects, but the estimate stabilizes in 3 years. So it means that the firms, they did take time, but we have already considered that. The last one is the most difficult one, is the enforcement. Given the case of endogenous enforcement, how that change our story? So effective emission tax rate might be even lower because of the negotiation between firms and the local governments. So this is all of my presentation. Thank you, Scott.
Good. That was great, interesting talk. We have about 5 minutes to ask additional questions if there are any.
Can I ask a question? This is Bert Hoffman.
Hey, Bert, how are you doing? Good, Bert. Yes, ask away.
I can maybe try and put on my camera. I don't know. I'm on my phone or my cell phone. So the question is, given these results, what do we expect from the carbon trading that is currently going on? We've seen prices sort of in the order of $7, $8 per ton. If elasticities were similar, what would you expect from this? Thanks. And thanks for the presentation. Interesting.
Thank you, Bert. This is a great question. First of all, sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide, these two policies share lots of things in common. Both the rate are very low, but we in our recent paper, we did find that even for a low carbon price, it works for firms. It is a little bit different because for carbon market, not many other prescriptive approaches for emission reduction. So it means that for carbon market, this is pretty much the primary regulatory instrument available. So it did play a central role in it. But for sulfur dioxide, there are so many other policies available. So they are not the primary policy. So I expect that in our previous paper, we find that the carbon price, although it's low, its trading is infrequent. It did reduces firm emissions and also actually help firm to improve its efficiency. Yeah.
Any other final questions out there?
If I may, because you're using maybe firm level data about emissions, could you further look at maybe satellite data on emissions or firm activities, which may be, further supplementing the analysis with less measurement error or potential underreporting bias?
Yes, so this is my favorite topic about the validity of the data. But introducing for satellite data to monitor emission levels, this is also subject to huge measurement error. It's okay to measurement concentration, maybe better, but for emissions, I'm afraid that using the firm level data. So this is the one concern about the quality, but this has already been the best available data in China at the firm level. But you are correct. This is the concern of misreporting of the data. Yeah.
Okay. I think that you're addressing one of the most important issues that's out there today, and I think it's an issue that is important for China. It's important for the lessons the world can learn, and I think it's good that we're dealing with this as a joint U.S.-China sort of initiative, and I think it's very important. And Junjie, thank you. It was great seminar, really great seminar. So thank you.